My understanding is Arabic and Persian are definitely taking part, and CBS is a co-sponsor. I believe Persian is there Saturday afternoon. I think, if I remember, Arabic's earlier in the morning. So if you happen to be out and about, please go support our colleagues who will be rather warm that day, and encourage people to get out to, learn about languages, because the second language requirement is a little bit worrisome right now. Another upcoming event is on Wednesday, October 16th. It's a brown bag talk by Professor Jessica Barnes, a geography professor from the University of South Carolina, and she'll be speaking about bread in Egypt. That event is co-sponsored by the Center for Regional Food Studies and directed by Professor Megan Carney. Now, today it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Thomas Stevenson, Professor Emeritus of Anthropology from the University of Ohio, Zanesville. He received his PhD in anthropology from Wayne State University in 1981. He has done extensive in-country research in Yemen. He's had a wonderful career in Middle East studies, and I met him 22 years ago, almost to the day, but not quite, as a part of this colloquium series when he gave a talk on Yemen in 2003 at the center. At that point, I knew very little about the topic, and the colloquium assisted me in teaching my students about Yemen more effectively. So Dr. Stevenson was at that time president of the American Institute for Yemeni Studies, which he served in that position until 2005. And before that, he had served as vice president of the American Institute for Yemeni Studies. After his period of service to that overseas research center, he received many separate grants continuing his research support on women in sport in Yemen. I think the last time that you were back in country was 2011?
2014.
Okay, 2014. And Dr. Stevenson, in addition to his work on women in sport, has also participated in many center activities over the years. In fall 2019, he took part in a panel, Yemen in Tumult, War and Fragmentation, with Professors Lucas, Hudson, and Dr. Peterson. That had a very lively question and answer, which I hope we do today too. He also served the Middle East Studies community as the Middle East Studies Association Film Fest coordinator for 2013 to 2019. It was my pleasure to submit reviews to him and serve as a film reviewer at that point, and we always had engaging conversations about film. He's remained active in the World Congress for Middle East Studies and other scholarly associations. His most recent presentation was in September, which I believe all of you had the joy of getting up in the middle of the night to present your papers.
If anybody got up in the middle of the night, you're nuts, including me.
But for those of
Congratulations, thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, which I realized, the International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences did an event in Istanbul, Turkey from September 4th to 6th, which many of our faculty got up in the middle of the night to give presentations overseas, including Anne, or Dr. Betteridge. Okay, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Stevenson for his talk on enemies and allies in Yemeni football, sports, and national identity.
Okay, thank you all for that surprising applause. First, I wanted to say that although I am responsible for this, a lot of the information that I have for this and a whole lot of previous papers came from my partner, Abdul Karim Al-Auj, who used to be at Saleh University, and maybe he still is. Recently, he just sent me an email saying that he'd been forced to move to Aden. And he said, I'll tell you about it sometime, which is kind of how all Yemeni are. I guess they get you on the hook, and then, I don't know, you're either supposed to drown or something. But anyway, he hasn't answered any questions. But he did provide a lot of background information for what I'm going to say today, which deals with football and a whole lot of other things. Football, by the way, is here meaning what we call in the U.S. soccer. So Really what the main focus is about national identity and nationalism, although there'll be some, I don't know, convoluted way of getting there. I think what Donald Trump calls the we, where he starts talking about one thing and 40 minutes later comes back and mentions it. I'm a little more organized than that, I hope. At any rate, let's just say something about football in general. That sport, no sport has proven better at helping establish a sense of nation than football. Football is the most important setting within popular culture. It's really now global culture for displaying a national identity that can be mediated through mass communication. And let's just leap ahead here to the more really pressing point from the historian Eric Hobsbawm, who said, "The imagined community of billions, that is the country, seems more real as a team of 11 named players." And that is really what it's all about. And if you watch the World Cup, for example, there are the 11 named players, and the stands are filled with people saying, yeah, that's me. And that's really what nationalism and national identity through sports is all about. Football culture is really now global, with perhaps the exception of the United States. Here we have all kinds of sports where we have world championships of only teams that are found here, which is not exactly, I would say, a slightly different definition of world than everybody else uses. Anyway, in football culture, fans really identify with their teams. They follow everything. They go to matches, they display banners, flags, wear all the clothes, paint their faces. They all have individual cheers for their teams, local teams, their countries, cheerleaders, things that we don't have, even in the most rabid American football games. Football began principally in Europe as a male pastime, and it is largely so, but increasingly women are fans. And that's not just limited to Europe. Iranian women protested years ago, maybe more than a decade ago, that they couldn't go to matches to watch the men play. And they used to sneak in. They would dress up as men and sneak in, and they would get caught by the police and sent away and whatever. And eventually, it got to the Iranian Supreme Court, who said, oh, why the hell can't they go? Just make a separate section for the women, and they go. And they cheer, and they're just as, I suppose, crazy as the men. More or less. And as a practical matter, FIFA, the International Football Federation, has been promoting this. But what I really want to talk to you about today is Yemen. Most of you probably know where Yemen is, so I put this here because sometimes people like London, where it is. That's where Yemen is, at the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Yemen, like that, wasn't always that way. Until really the early 1970s, there were two Yemens. They were divided and hostile towards each other. And 1990, they more or less united. It's never been a happy marriage, but they did unite, so they're now just one Yemen. Football in Yemen has had a fairly unhappy life. It's true that Yemeni are fanatical about football, but in real terms, practical terms, they're not so successful. Football came to South Yemen before independence with the British, who had, of course, soldiers running around playing football because they were bored silly, probably in Aden. And it came to North Yemen in the 1950s by watching expatriates play. And when the two countries united in 1970, each state tried to, build on this sort of interest in sports. Not because they were interested in physical activity, but it was political. It's a way to unite the country. Yemen is, millions of villages, and half the villages hate the other half of the villages. So how do you get people to have a sense of national identity? You create a national system. That was new. And there was sports, and they said, wow. They learned this, I'm pretty sure, from the East Germans. And football culture developed pretty slowly because in the early days there was no TV and no real radio. So I mean, no one was going to a stadium and broadcasting a game. If there was a game broadcast at all, it came from Cairo. You know, it was Al Ahly versus Zamalek. There wasn't anything in Yemen because Yemen didn't have the capability to do that. And television, didn't get to Yemen even remotely until I'd say 1980. And television in those days used to just show reruns of American programs, you know, like Fury and Lassie and stuff like that, which led all the Yemeni people to say, wow, look at America, how smart their animals are. You know, well, I didn't know. Anyway, over the course of time, the government got behind this really significantly and began building stadiums, promoting, financing sports clubs, promoting sports activities, football in particular. When Yemen played international matches, which wasn't that often, they got huge crowds, even though the teams did pretty badly. Okay? As a way of pointing this out, between 2011 and 2014, Yemen only won 2 of 31 international matches, including on a 17-game losing streak. Nonetheless, I mean, the fans were rabid, and they still would show up or watch on TV. And you could wonder, how is this possible? None of you are really old enough to know this. But look up the New York Mets. And you'll see that when they started, they lost virtually every game, and people still went and cheered like crazy, even watching them lose. Or maybe I haven't looked at the attendance, but the Chicago White Sox might have done that this year. Right? Well, they certainly, I think, outdid the Mets in losses, but I don't know how many people went. Okay, so now we get to 2011, because we've skipped all the years of losing matches. 2011 was a fateful year throughout the Arab world in what is sometimes called the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia and then spread, to Egypt. It was in Syria, Libya, Bahrain, and eventually Yemen. And everyone was complaining about, what the uprisings were about, was the fact that all the leaders of these countries had been in power for 30 or more years. No election, well, there were elections, but I mean sham elections. And they wanted to do something different. Admittedly, as I know from Yemen, they wanted change. They had no idea what they wanted because they had never had any experience over all these years, and it certainly wasn't being taught in school. So I mean, if they were to succeed in overthrowing the government, chaos would ensue, or in the case of, for example, Egypt, the military would jump in, assume power. So in Yemen, they were calling for the resignation of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been president even from before unification for 33 years. And he got to power almost certainly by killing his 2 predecessors. Not necessarily shooting them directly, but organizing them. So Yemen had huge protests, particularly in Sana'a, where I happened to be at that time. Students took over all the main streets surrounding the university, so all businesses there were closed. The roads got shut. In the main square in Sana'a, the government brought in tribesmen to counter the student protests, and they erected tents and whatever. It was a bit nicer because there were people handing out food, and anybody who was walking around could get like a tray of of food, so I got a lot of free lunches by just wandering around. And nothing happened. And eventually, Saleh resigned. He abdicated in favor of his Vice-President Hadi. He abdicated not because of the protests, international pressure, mostly from the Gulf states. They wanted him gone. They put a lot of pressure on him to resign. But in letting him resign, they allowed him many things. He didn't have to leave the country. He was freed from prosecution. It sounds kind of like Trump, but he was free from prosecution. He was allowed to keep all of the money he'd stolen. He remained the president or the head of his political party. Right? And he remained in command of those elements of the military that were loyal to him. So he had his own army and his own money, and he was life free and clear. Admittedly, this didn't satisfy the population, but I mean, it's an awfully good deal. I mean, he should have just taken his money and gone. But anyway, he didn't. Because there was a lot of unrest in Yemen, FIFA, the International Federation for Football, prohibited any international matches in Yemen. They thought, I don't know what they thought would happen, but it was probably a wise move. So things were not going too well. When Saleh resigned, the international people who kind of pushed him out said, okay, we have to reorganize the government here because the country is in chaos, which was true. They required there be a national dialogue conference where they were going to restructure the government, divide up the territories in unique ways. So this went on for over a year. I don't know how many millions of dollars it cost. And came up with nothing. Which, you could have foretold in most cases. Anyway, the big hang-ups to solving this and creating a new government structure were, one, the people who used to live in Aden, or in the South Yemen, they wanted more autonomy. They hated the government in Sana'a. They wanted more autonomy. And in the north of Yemen, there was a group, which we'll talk about in a minute, the Houthis, who probably everybody knows the Houthis now because Israel just bombed them 15 times today, as a matter of fact. Maybe it won't be effective. But anyway, they wanted more autonomy. So let's talk about the Houthis because it's a little confusing. In the north of Yemen, I'll show you a map in a second. There's a group of Shia Muslims, followers of the Zaidi sect of Islam. And they split from Sunni Islam about 900 BCE, so a long time ago. They're very often claimed to be Shiites like those people, the Twelvers in Iran. The Twelvers don't show up until about 1500. So there's really no connection. The only thing is that they have the Shia in their name, which in Yemen they never say it anyway, but everybody else does. And so they're thought that, but they're separate. And they used to be the government. The Zaidi used to govern North Yemen. There's no difference in practical terms between the Shafi, who are the Sunni sect in Yemen, and the Zaydis. They go to the same mosques, they follow the same rituals. The Zaydis have a few holidays that they celebrate, sort of. But there's really no difference. They're just like every other Yemeni. I've lived almost all of my time in Yemen among the Zaydi, and they're no more fanatical than anybody else. They coexisted very happily until 1990 when the Yemen's united, when a new sort of political religious group showed up, very close to the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's who they are. They were Here's how the division plays out. Can't really see it here because we have multi-colors here. But in the center of Yemen, this is where the Zaidi are and were. These are two sort of ambiguous provinces. And the rest, which shows up, I guess it's purple, are where the Shafis or the Sunni group are. With really no distinction. Anyway, the Houthis formed out of the Zaidi religious area, and they were formed in the 1990s because they were opposed to the Saudis. The Saudis, for many years, were afraid that there were Shiites on their border, and that they might be a threat. It's in a way foolish, because when there were Shiites running Yemen and they were thrown out, it was the Saudis who were backing them in the 60s. So, I mean, it didn't make any sense. But anyway, they were afraid of this. I think it's probably because Ahmed bin Salman didn't really understand what's going on. Anyway, the Zaidis formed as an opposition to both the Yemen government and outside influences, because the Saudis were trying to convince all the Zaidis to become Sunni. Wow. So they would send all these Salafi missionaries all over the country to convert people. They built religious schools, they built mosques all around in the Zaidi areas. And well, the people who became the Houthis were really upset about this, even though it's kind of my feeling that these missionaries weren't very successful, because more than a dozen times they tried to convert me, and I mean, I'm not most likely to be, a Zaidi Muslim. I mean, it seems like it would take not much rocket science to figure that out. At any rate, so they began really pressing the government for changes. One, they really wanted development in their areas. And the government, even though Saleh was a Zaidi, Saleh wasn't buying it, so he wasn't sending any aid or development to the Houthi areas. So the Houthis really went to war with the central government beginning in 2004. And over the next 6 more or less years, they went to war annually. Why they stopped each of the times, I don't know. There's a lot of things about war that don't make sense to me. Like, for example, why in Afghanistan there's a fighting season as opposed to like any other months of the year. But here we saw they went 6 times. What they wanted was greater regional autonomy, that is Zaidi. They wanted to end favoritism towards Sunni groups, preservation of Zaidi culture, and they wanted to end government corruption. That attracted a lot of followers. None of the other stuff. But the fact that they said we're opposed to corruption, they got people from all over Yemen to say, okay, we're with you, at least temporarily. So the wars went on for 6 years. None of them were decisive. Each time the Yemeni army withdrew, and then people would be sitting around saying, well, I wonder what general is going to get sent there next, and be made a fool. What the Houthis gained was an enormous amount of military experience. Nothing could be better than having 6 wars that you at least come to a stalemate. And the Yemeni army left tons of weapons every time. When they abandoned their positions, the Houthis got this bonanza of weapons. And then in 2014, the government, the Saleh government, under international pressure, took away the subsidies for gas. That caused a major uprising in the country because nobody could go anyplace because they were getting really cheap gas. Now they had to pay this high price. The Houthis seized upon this as the opportunity of a lifetime. and they marched right into Sana'a. In less than a month, they went from the far north of the country to the Saudi border. They took their army all the way into Sana'a, captured it in like 3 weeks. Only like 500 people got killed. And they were helped in this because the former President Saleh had turned over to the Houthis his army. They started a private army, so that helped them to some degree too. And from Sana'a, they did advance south to Aden, but eventually then things changed. They were forced back slightly to the north. So the president, so-called Hadi, seeing that he was in trouble, he fled to Saudi Arabia and asked for help. And the Saudis said, okay, and they formed a coalition, mostly of the Gulf states, but they also got Morocco, Egypt, Eritrea, God knows what they could do, Nigeria, Sudan, to be in this coalition. I think they just signed "We're with you" or something, because they really didn't do anything. Oh, Egypt did block a poor fellow. And the fighting that went, the beginning of the Civil War, when the Civil War started, and onwards, the primary actors were the Saudis and the Emiratis. Also in this mix, I think hired by the Emiratis, were mercenaries, constellas mercenaries. These you would know, if you know history, they used to be Blackwater, who were American mercenaries who were in Iraq, among other places, and then became Z, and then I don't know. They changed the name every 5 minutes, but they're the same guys. Okay, the Saudis were really supported heavily by the U.S. and the U.K., who gave them weapons, planes, of course. U.S. and U.K. provided targeting for the Saudis. That is, they told them, here are the coordinates that you want to shoot, because this is, whatever. All right, so they provided targeting, they did maintenance for the planes, and they did mid-air refuel. So Americans were there, just not actually doing the fighting. But, if your plane is like over Yemen and it's out of gas, then will come an American tanker and gas you up, and then you could go on. This was obviously one-sided. The Houthis didn't have any airplanes. And the Saudis, for their part in particular, were just bombing the hell out of Yemen, with no apparent purpose, really. The bombing began in the beginning of March 2015, about, 2 months, 3 months after they were asked to help. And it went on until there was a temporary truce in 2022. We're still in the temporary truce. Things haven't changed. Right? The Yemen Data Project says that in those 7 years, there were about 25,000 air raids. Of those, we won't go through the whole business, but 28% of those air raids clearly were aimed at civilian targets. Hospitals, schools, weddings, funerals, all kinds of stuff. So you would have to say that a lot of this was pretty vindictive. It didn't have anything to do with self-defense or returning anyone to political office. It was all vindictive. 32% were clearly military targets, and the other is kind of a mixed bag. The Saudis also blockaded the ports so that no food, not fuel, or medicine could get in. Which I would have thought was more than vindictive, but at any rate, that was their thing. It's also worth noting, I think, that among the weapons that the U.S. gave to the Saudis, which the Saudis deployed, are cluster bombs. And fortunately, most of you are probably too young to know cluster bombs, but the U.S. used them heavily in Southeast Asia. cluster bombs, you throw a big bomb down, it sort of explodes, but what comes out of it are like softball or baseball sized round objects. They don't explode. They're just scattered all over the place. Then children come and pick them up and kaboom, amputees. So we gave the Saudis these weapons. And of course the Saudis threw them where they'd be the best action, right in farm fields. So we were out there plowing your field, boom, boom, there's the donkey and everybody else gone. It really isn't war in its basic phase. So there we have the war. Nonetheless, let's go back to something more pleasant. Football continues during this time. Not, of course, regular games, because the regular league is canceled. But fans still wanted to see football. So people are playing in the streets. Adults, children, everyone's playing in the streets. In conflict areas when there were lulls, and not a risk of being bombed, informal matches were held. Tournaments were held, and businessmen put up money as prize money for tournaments. It's kind of surprising. And you can get a sense of this sort of, right? Here's in this slide on the left, this is an Aden. This is an informal match. I mean, seen from one side of the field. I mean, a huge number of people showing up to see this. Now, there wasn't so much bombing in Aden, but on the left, this is a typical situation. Players would show up. Fans will pull up in their cars, sit around their cars. This first sign there's going to be a plane flying overhead in the cars and flying away. Not how you would think of like going to a U of A football game. Here are some fans. You really can't see because the light is fading on the projector. But a whole lot of these players have painted their face green. And supported their teams, but because the lights were already green, you don't see that too clearly. And people were really intent on what was going on here. Let's see if I can put this. Where's that? Here's an informal match. These are rockets being shot right over the field, and they keep playing. You have an announcer here, the fans in their easy chairs, and military rockets flying over the field. They could have landed on them. They didn't care. And because they were really just like thrilled to pieces by, hey, we're still going. Okay? Football continued in international ways. Even though it couldn't be played in Yemen, Yemen wanted to field their national team, the men's adult team, and a junior team that's supposed to be under 15 or 16. Coaches went around the country, crossing over the lines between the Zaidi or the Houthis and the government, searching for people who wanted to play. For the adult players, a lot of them were known because they'd been before in leagues. The Yemen Football Association, the only recognized football body in the country, recognized by FIFA, facilitated some of this. And the Houthis and the other regular government facilitated some too. The adult team eventually ended up training outside the country in Qatar originally. The youth team was trained primarily in Yemen. The funding for all of this was supposedly provided by the Yemen Football Association. I mean, it really was not there. It came from FIFA, the Asian Football Confederation, a bunch of donors, and the like. Anyway, things were fairly chaotic. And at this time, Yemen surprisingly qualified for the Asian Cup. The Asian Cup was going to be held in the Emirates in 2019, but the preliminaries, the qualifying rounds, just like, not quite like we have in baseball, 2 playoffs and you're in. No. This they began in 2015. And there's home and away. And when, it's not like flying, across country. You got to fly. Well, Yemen played in like the Maldives, and they played in Nepal, and these are not short hops. Anyway, Yemen qualified eventually. We won't worry about the details of it, but they qualified eventually to be one of the 24 teams that went to the Emirates. But way back in the beginning, Yemen's first match was supposed to be against Pakistan. And it was going to be held in Doha, this substitute home field, because they couldn't be playing at home. And the team was in Yemen. They couldn't get to Doha because they were afraid. The airports were all closed. And someone had suggested that they could drive, which is between 36 and 48 hours of driving, where of course you could be bombed to smithereens all the way, right? So the team decided that they would smuggle themselves out on a freighter. They went, some people say they were in Aden, other people say they went to another small port, El Mocha, from which you get the coffee. They got smuggled out on a cattle freighter, which cannot have been a pleasant experience. So they sailed 13 hours across the Red Sea to Djibouti. And then they hopped on a plane and flew to Doha. And, here they are in Doha. Now they look surprisingly good for having spent 13 hours with probably several thousand cattle. Anyway, they were happily there. Qatar gave them all kinds of facilities and was really helpful because they were building all this stuff heading up to the World Cup. And for Yemeni, this could not have been better because the Aspire football camp, not to be confused with Aspire next door, the Aspire football camp is really, people go from all over the world to Aspire. So Yemeni really lucked out. It also had training camps in Saudi, which is a little odd. Here the Saudis are bombing them. They're forced out of the country. But now the Saudis will say, welcome to our country where we'll help you train, which they did for a while. The same with Emiratis. Emiratis were bombing and waging war, especially in the south of Yemen. And they're saying, oh, gee, you need a place to practice? Well, come over here, which really doesn't add up in terms of logic. But it's the Middle East, and maybe logic doesn't work quite the same way. Way more about that word. Anyway, so by a fluke of teams not being able to participate, other teams not being able to participate, Yemen did advance, actually, to one of the 24 teams that went to the Asian Cup. Originally 40, when it was whittled down to the actual tournament, there were 24 teams. The Yemen Association for Sports Media launched a Twitter campaign saying, Yemen the history, Asia the dream. This is really wishful thinking, but that's what they did. They also made a statement which weren't realistic. Despite the current war and destruction, Yemen remains a part of the present and of history. Qualifying for the Asian Cup is a dream in and of itself, no matter how Yemen fares in the UAE, which it turns out Yemen lost all three of its matches there. Anyway, the country was ecstatic over the fact that the team qualified. That alone was like a victory. As I say, they lost everything. So let's move to a slightly different and a happier circumstance. In West Asia, which is the Arabian Peninsula, Syria, Iraq, they have an annual football tournament. Iran used to be in West Asia too, but for political reasons. so they hold their annual conference or tournament. And in 2021, Yemen entered its junior under 15 team. And the team was recruited by scouts going all over the country. As I said, the team was trained in Yemen and in Saudi Arabia. These people didn't have that much experience, for sure, because half their lives had been a civil war. I mean, how much can you learn playing street football, right? But they got good coaching. They really did, good coaching. And so they went to the tournament. There was no qualification. They just entered directly. Saudis hosted the tournament. There were 9 clubs that were, not 9 countries that were there. They were divided into 3 groups, winners of each group plus the next best qualifier advanced. Yemen, surprisingly, beat Bahrain and Jordan, and then they beat Syria in the semifinals. In the final, they were paired up against Saudi Arabia. I mean, first of all, Yemen, out of 100 matches, Yemen has won like 2 against Saudi Arabia in all these years. Right? And, okay, the finals was held in Dammam. The stadium, at the match drew about 20,000 spectators. It happens in international football that we don't really think about here. Everybody knows, at least, that if you have like a Saudi fan next to a Yemeni fan, they might get into a little tiff in the match. So seeding is Saudi side, Yemeni side, or any other international match. It's this way. The World Cup being kind of the exception. Right? So they're separated. Not that many Saudis comparatively went to the match, but the Yemen side was full. That's because there are millions of Yemeni living in Saudi Arabia as expat workers. So they're wild with joy at their team getting there. And then right at the beginning of the match, Yemen scored a goal. I mean, the fans were berserk. And then they were holding their breath or biting their nails or whatever, waiting for the end. Well, in extra time, past the 90-minute limit, in the 92nd minute, the Saudis tied the game. Right? So then the game ended in a draw and necessitated a shootout. I don't know if you know shootouts, but each side, one by one, shoots at the goal of the other team. Initially, you start with 5 players making the shots. Anyway, Yemen won the shootout 4-3. This is Yemen's first victory at anything, and by far the best finish ever. And chaos ensued. The team itself was like, holy crap, look what we've done. And they're running around the field, jumping on each other and cheering and screaming and whatever. When they got the trophy, it was awarded, they ran around, look at us, we got. You can see that. Watch the NFL or the NHL. When they get the Stanley Cup, they're all dropping around with it. Okay? The team was posing for pictures, everything was going on. The fans were just berserk. And in Yemen, everybody had been watching the matches on TV. In houses, in tea shops, the government's put up giant screens for people to watch. I imagine images were just terrible. But put them up. People were watching on their phones. They were just berserk. People flooded the streets. Chaos really ensued. I'll show you a video of this in a second. But the street, this air was filled with the sounds of fireworks, which they set off in Yemen for practically anything. Car horns, and people were firing their pistols and their rifles in the air. Lots of people were injured by falling bullets. 5 got killed by falling bullets. Just be a warning to you on New Year's Eve here. Don't go out with your assault rifle and blast away in the air because the bullet might come down and kill you. Everyone was ecstatic. And they thought this was a kind of retribution for the Saudi bombing of the country. Let's see, here, oh, here we can see this, I hope, video. So of course they were thrilled to pieces, and that's obvious. More important way of looking at this is kind of how people reacted to it. In the stadium in Daman, there was a banner that was held up and said all the beauty and what was Arabia Felix, that's an ancient name for Yemen, is gone. We only have the hopes of the national team. That's really the savior of things. What the poster reflected is something that really nobody talks about when they're talking about Houthis and whatnot. Yemen was at that time, and still is, a country divided among four factions. Right? We have, in the capital, we have Ansar Allah, or the Houthis. And in Aden, or Riyadh, depending on the day or something, you have the internationally recognized government of Yemen. In the south, in Aden, you have the Southern Transitional Council. And then kind of scattered around in the desert areas are Al-Qaeda, all of whom are trying to make Yemen their home. Okay. The championship in the tournament was Yemen's first international title, as I told you. The country received, I don't know who received, but messages from the head of the EU, the ambassadors of Britain, China, US, and Saudi Arabia. The prime minister, that is the one in Aden, Riyadh, gave the team 300 million reals, which isn't actually that much money. But they did all that.
It's good
So this was a big deal.
For 16-year-olds, it's good.
Oh no, believe me, it's great if you're a 15-year-old, but you've got an enormous family who probably haven't eaten in weeks. You know, so the money is gone really quickly. But you're right, for a 15-year-old, they wouldn't even know what to do with this. And other people, there's a Yemeni woman, Tawako Carmen, who got the Nobel Prize 20 years ago or something. She gave a big gift to the team for winning. There were other people who gave gifts. A couple of people got a lot of publicity for saying they were giving big gifts to the winning team, but they never paid, which is kind of the Yemeni style in some ways. Anyway, well, this is where those four governments are. Here was Saleh, the Houthis. Here's Aden, the Southerners. Also, the alleged government. And all these dashed lines are the Al-Qaeda areas. So, and that has not really changed. That map is from 2023. It hasn't really changed since then. Okay. This wasn't just a local event. The winning was a local event in Saudi Arabia, but the ramifications are really much wider, right? Because everyone in Yemeni communities wherever were watching this. We don't think about this necessarily. But there are big Yemeni communities here in the United States, in Detroit, or Dearborn, in Hamtramck, Oakland, Bakersfield, Lackawanna, in New York, and in New York City. And in Britain there are, and in China there are. They're all over, and they were all watching and all equally berserk over this event. And as the news site in Aden described this, Yemen had tears of joy from east to west and from north to south. People walked through ruined cities, dark alleys, on empty stomachs, with their eyes full of tears of joy to express love and a sense of victory. They were so thrilled to be, probably could not have been prouder to be Yemeni. Okay, the team eventually got back from Saudi Arabia. It took forever. First they had to go to Aden and be welcomed by the president there. President of the Southern Transitional Council. Then they went through a bunch of cities. They got to Sana'a, they were welcomed by the president, by the head of the Houthis. They had to go around there, greeted at least 3 times. Everybody was going to give them gifts. And it's not that the team did this, they did it, of course, but everybody followed this like crazy on TV. Even though it's the same event every day. I mean, but hooray, let's watch our guys be welcomed home. And that's what happened. And in terms of national identity, which was the start of this, despite the fact that the country was in a civil war, or perhaps you could say chaos, the people who were on the teams came from all over the country, Houthi areas, southern areas, whatever, old, regular old Yemeni areas. They all played as one team. The coaches were kind of remarkable in this, and the players too. Maybe because they were young, but they did this. And the belief existed then, and still, even today, exists, that it's football that can keep Yemen from collapsing into chaos. This is, I think, a bit of a pipe dream. But it's worked so far. Okay? Anyway, they got a strong sense of unity. So let's end it there. And I don't know how to get out of this, but maybe I'll escape. Anyway, wait, so that's what I have to say. If you have any questions, I'll answer them. If any of you have got, we could adjourn to a separate room and chew.
I don't think they advocate.
They always say you can't do this. But nobody knows what the hell it is. I mean, so why not? Let's chew got, and we could spend the next few hours talking about all kinds of stuff. Yes, Scott?
So thank you for that presentation. I think we just hit the 10-year anniversary of unsettled law being in the capital.
Yeah.
What would need to happen for them to become the internationally recognized government instead of the people in the hotel in Saudi Arabia?
Okay. First, you need to have the Saudis in particular recognize them. The Saudis aren't going to recognize them because the Saudis believe, and it's in the news all the time, that the Houthis are Shia. And at least Mohammed bin Salman, who, I mean, I think the evidence is pretty clear, is not very bright. He believes that they are essentially Iranians. So he's not going to do anything to advance their cause. This is, that's the first obstacle. And that's what would really have to happen. It would also probably have to happen that a lot more people would have, in Yemen, the actual rebellious, would have to really want the Houthis. The Houthis started out, they were very popular, especially during those 6 years of war. All kinds of people I used to talk to, they weren't necessarily thrilled by the Houthis. But every time the Houthis said they were opposed to corruption, and Saleh was corrupt beyond imagine. It attracted a lot of them, but once they became in government, they became pretty much as corrupt as anybody else. And I don't think that the international community, whatever that means, would accept them. I mean, it wouldn't say, oh, okay, let bygones be bygones. We're going to do this. One, because look, they've been shooting at ships in the Red Sea. They've been launching out missiles at Israel. So the international community, which often has mud on its face or egg on its face or whatever, I still think they would do it. And I'm not sure, because I can't get anyone to answer this question from afar, how the Houthis are governing. Because all of the people that I talk to, well, communicate with, or talk to by email or text or whatever, they won't talk. They'll talk about almost anything else. They don't want to touch this. And of course, I mean, the Houthis, now that they're in charge, they control all the communications. So if they want to read what you're saying, they can, and well, they can be vindictive. So I think it would take something, I think everyone is expecting, not me, but the international community is expecting that someday the Houthis will be overthrown. I don't know by whom. I have no idea who would do this. I mean, first of all, the Saudis couldn't really dislodge them, right? The Emiratis couldn't, well, the Emiratis at best, they captured the island of Socotra, okay, for a brief period of time.
They were kicked out, right?
They were kicked out, but how did they capture it? I mean, they came there by boat, they landed, I don't know, 2 derelict tanks, and like 20 guys, and they said, hey, we're captured you. And then they got thrown out, like a month later or something. You know, you would think, I know, it's the popular US expression, you know, if you put enough pressure on people, they'll rise up against their enemies or something. Well, you see how well that's worked in Cuba over these years, for example. And every other place that we've tried these kind of tactics. So this is just not sensible. The Houthis are a lot of people, and you know, I'm sure they're training all their kids to be good Houthi soldiers. They have, over the years, been running training camps and the like to indoctrinate them, mostly about Zaidi ideology, but other things. But you know, the average person in Yemen, it's hard to sometimes imagine here, the average kid in Yemen, even in the Civil War back in the 60s, I mean, they were going to war at 13, 14 years old. So, I mean, these aren't people who are going to die off any day soon. Right? So it's not like there's going to be a generational shift and then somebody new can come in. So I also don't think there's any real interest in the international community, well, especially the way things are going now in the Middle East, to focus any attention on Yemen, because there's a whole lot of other problems. I mean, you know, at any minute, maybe while we were talking, I mean, Israel could have bombed Iran. And clearly, I mean, there's going to be a lot of other issues, because Israel is going to try to take probably half of Lebanon. And they're already marching along on that. So no international community is going to say, oh, let's solve the problem of these Houthis. I mean, they're going to send their drones and bomb them because they're attacking ships in the Red Sea, which is a big nuisance. I mean, it's costly for the shipping companies. You know, it's dangerous if you're on the ships.
And also for the Egyptian economy, the president recently announced that the national revenue from the Suez Canal is 60% less.
Oh, yeah, nobody's going to go through the Suez Canal. My God, no.
It's impacting the region.
Oh, it's going to affect everything. But,
That's what
I mean, all they're going to have, if they're really gonna get rid of the Houthis, they're gonna have to go and not just bomb, I mean, they're gonna have to send troops. I mean, the Egyptians sent how many troops way back in the 60s?
Yeah.
And were driven out pretty handily by Yemeni with, I mean, ancient weapons,
Muskets, yeah.
ancient weapons.
Yeah.
And the Yemeni are still carrying around a lot of these ancient weapons. I don't know where they get the ammunition, but,
Probably Saudi Arabia.
so they, I don't know if they went when you were there anyway, but before, there used to be a huge weapons market north of Sada, Sukkotah, and you could buy anything there. At least in what would be called small arms, which is like bazookas, and grenades, and mortars and stuff. But people used to tell me, well, you can get a tank if you want. You just have to order in advance. And a lot of our had tanks when you were there.
So I want to go back to soccer.
Oh yeah, sure, that's
Yeah.
good. That's much more fun
Yeah.
than most. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think what was moving I think it's what was moving for me showing the video clips after
Right.
the win,
Yeah.
and where you have all these political, religious divides, so to speak,
Right.
they all melt away.
They all melted away.
You know, during that moment of communitas, if you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of coming together. So we see also in North Africa in
Oh,
particular.
and Morocco, my God.
Yeah, Morocco.
When the World
Moroccans are investing massively in soccer.
Yeah.
This is the politics now, and that also has some socioeconomic elements to it. You know, it's so then you see this in the middle of in terms of Yemen. What are some of the implications? Should we be thinking about maybe naively building more soccer academies?
Oh.
More of things that can bring people together.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Or is this just a fleeting moment?
Oh, no, this is not a fleeting moment.
Yeah.
This has been going on.
How can you
It's been-
leverage
but,
this moment?
Virtually all the football structures in Yemen, 70% are estimated to have been destroyed by the bombing. The Saudis said, oh, don't worry, we're going to give you $400 million to rebuild your infrastructure. I mean, $400 million won't build you one stadium, even in Yemen. So this is just hogwash. And the Saudis have said, oh, we're going to rebuild the country by pledging $1 billion. You can give them $1 billion, even if it was all spent on reconstruction. It isn't going to fix anything, right? So this is crap. What should happen, the U.S. Embassy, if it was doing anything, and not doing anything, they should really be promoting this kind of stuff. Or they should send scouts around and find really good football prospects and send them to the Aspire Academy and let the people there train them. That's what the Nigerians are doing, and all the people along the west coast of Africa. They're sending all of their best prospects to Aspire Academy to be trained, and then when they come back, they're training the kids at home. Now that could happen. There won't be any place to play, I have to say, because it's been kind of demolished in Yemen. But if somebody builds even rudimentary stuff, they want to play. They see this as important, not only to themselves. A lot of them want to be professionals, to be sure, but they see this as unifying their communities. And you're right, Kamata is the factor there, and people really believe that. I've been to a lot of matches, and astronomical are really bad matches, but I've been to them, and I mean, all the things that you would read about in an anthropology ritual textbook, for example, they're all there. It's sometimes hard to pick out among the other stuff, but it's all there. So I know people often think, look at, oh, football is just a sport, doesn't mean that much. Okay, maybe it doesn't mean that much here. I mean, okay, U of A fans, but I mean, it doesn't have a global thing. But football is treated internationally much different than sports in America. And the impact is greater, and it really gives people a sense of belonging to their communities or to their country, as you rightly said. And I'm sure, although I didn't look for this, I'm sure after Morocco's remarkable finish in the World Cup, I mean, the country was probably berserk.
Oh, yeah, it's immense. And Morocco leveraged that moment to do certain things. Soft diplomacy.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you could talk about that side of,
Yeah,
using, suckers, it's for economic
Oh, yes.
development, cultural
absolutely.
development, and all sorts of things. So
Yemen could have done this if they'd ever really been winning.
yeah, right.
Yeah, the Arabian Gulf countries have been doing this, I think, now for over a decade.
Yeah.
By Paris Saint-Germain, right? And
Right.
France, and all these
Oh,
very
yeah.
wealthy. So they have been putting this, but it's a different, I think it's a different conversation. They are presenting this from the standpoint of how to diversify.
Right.
the economies.
We're gonna run out of oil, so
But it has
let's
a
own Paris Saint-Germain.
Yeah.
But it has a geopolitical component as well.
But what's unique about Yemen, if I get you correctly, is that in the middle of instability of these three governments, I was wondering under what flag they were playing in Saudi Arabia. So the unity, I think,
Okay.
cultivating that sense of.
They're governed, even though it's a regional tournament, they're essentially governed by FIFA. You know, FIFA allows you to have one flag.
Yeah,
You can't say like, oh, I'm so-and-so.
Yeah.
So even though the South really wants to be independent, and a lot of the best players on the Yemen's squads were from the South, they're under the official Yemen flag. So that part, it would be a point, but FIFA is a lot of bad things, to be sure.
Are they more corrupt than Ayatollah Saleh, or just?
Well, I don't know. There's a question. You know, a lot of their officials are in prison.
Yes,
that's
right.
And Ayatollah Saleh didn't go to prison. It is true, he did run into a rocket propelled grenade.
No, but that previous commissioner, he didn't go to.
Platter? Are you talking about?
Zeb Platter?
Right.
Yes, no, he didn't, but a lot of
But, I mean-
lower.
Michel Platini.
No, Platter should have been. He was, but you know, sometimes, not really relevant here, but I will say that Platter at varying times struck me as being kind of stupid, or not exactly aware of what was going on. Maybe that's just an impression, I don't know. But he should have been in prison, but FIFA, I will say, I mean, you can say a lot of bad things about FIFA, and I'll be certainly happy to join you. They've invested an enormous amount, they may have stolen the money, but they've invested a lot of money in football, everywhere. There are countries that you've never even heard of, that FIFA's putting money into. Women's football is growing in the world because of FIFA. FIFA not only saying we're going to put out money, but if you don't do this, we're not giving you, the men's side, anything. I mean, it may be heavy-handed, but they're doing it, and it's been very successful. I mean, even Yemen, God knows, you know how segregated Yemen is. Yemen has a women's team.
Really?
Oh, I don't think it's any good, but they practice and they do whatever, and FIFA's putting up the money. Or at least some of them. So, I mean, well, when I say the women's team isn't any good, the men's team isn't any good either. But FIFA's responsible for that. So there's a lot of bad things about FIFA and a lot of the political things. And, I mean, why did the World Cup end up in Qatar? I mean, it was bribery city.
It's agreed in Saudi Arabia in 2 cycles.
Oh, yeah, no, no.
Yeah, so it's going back again to the region.
No, no,
Several
there's
circumstances.
a lot, yes. Well, it's money.
Yeah.
And a lot of countries don't want to put up, I mean, look, why are we having a World Cup, the next World Cup in North America, divided between Mexico and the US and Canada? Because we can't afford the money that it takes. So if you're gonna have it someplace, you gotta have a hell of a lot of money.
Saudi Arabia was the only one who made an offer, and they got it.
Yeah, and they have the money to do
They
it.
had the money to do it.
You know, when we had the World Cup here, I forgot what year it was, but 94. In Los Angeles, essentially, and a few other cities, but it was all in the US.
94.
But you can't, now it's just too damn expensive.
Yeah.
So we may be, I know, we may be a rich country unless you ask some of the political candidates who say that we're really a third world country. So the Saudis can do it. And they bought up all the big teams. The Saudis and Qatar have bought up the big teams. Yeah.
So I wanted to, along these same lines, so there's some type of national, like, football association?
Oh, yes, yes. All countries that are part of FIFA have to have a national football association.
Who is running that?
Okay.
Like, where is it
Okay,
run from?
this is a
and
big
how?
question, right? First of all, there are the governments themselves, like the Yemen recognized government, the Houthi government. They have ministries, and one is Ministry of Youth and Sports. But all of the sports of football, not all those sports, but football, is controlled, it's administered partly by those ministries. But it's the Yemen Football Association. That's the recognized body that FIFA recognizes. So when FIFA gets money, it goes to the Football Association. There's only one association per country. And in Yemen, it's essentially divided. There's an office in Sana'a, kind of the Houthi area, an office in Aden, right? And it's one organization. They kind of coordinate, I guess, by cell phone or whatever they're doing.
So it still is a unified.
It's a unified,
organization with one person in charge.
unified reference to FIFA. But exactly how that works is difficult because I chased after this information for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. And everybody is kind of, they either don't know the answer, they don't want to really tell you. But it seems that that's what's going on.
Right, so they're the ones who were responsible for training.
They're the responsible for
players.
recruiting, for training, not doing the training themselves, but if they're going to send them outside the country to have, let's say, competitions or go to a training camp, they're the ones who are supposed to organize this. It's not always the case because the Yemen team was at least once in Saudi Arabia. They were going to go back to Qatar for additional training, and the Saudis said, no, you can't go. And they sent them to Malaysia. That's because there's a tiff between, there used to be a tiff, I think there probably still is, between Qatar and the other, the Saudis and Emiratis and the like. I don't know how they could prevent them going back to Qatar. I've never understood. I mean, it's one thing, like if you go to the airport and you're gonna get on a plane to, like, I don't know, Phoenix, someone shows up and says, oh no, you've gotta go to LA. How the hell does that happen? But that is what happened for this team, because of course the Saudis are themselves, and that's what they did. So to some degree, the Yemen Football Association is the responsible party. They coordinate stuff. Part of their job is, they're not probably the most honest people, by the way, but part of their job is to raise money from the wealthy Yemeni in Yemen, in exile. They get money in Detroit, for example. They get money all over the place. They go all over the place to raise money from wealthy Yemeni abroad to fund some of this stuff. I don't know what will become of this situation because they have to kind of sort some of this out. You know, you can't be a Yemeni football association in two places, because one might say something that's contradictory to somebody else. So,
And in the current situation, we don't have a national league or tournament for soccer, or do we?
oh no, it closed in 2014.
Yeah.
Then they did start it up in, I think maybe 2019, I'm not sure. Briefly, I think it didn't go very well. But in that time, the teams that came from the south
Yeah.
refused to participate.
I see.
They would still play in national,
I see. To represent Yemen, but not.
but they would not play in the league. So the league had originally been like 20 or 22 teams, and it was reduced to 14, and they brought in new teams to round it out. And the last time I asked about that, I was told that they were trying to work out an agreement to get the southern teams back. It's probably because the southern teams have some of the best players in the country. I mean, so nationally, you want to have them, and they will play on the national team, but they won't play in the domestic league. So I mean, Yemen is just it's kind of a mess, and to keep track of this is really difficult, especially since the Houthi took over the main newspaper. They don't really report sports anymore, which means that I'm kind of relying on like southern newspapers, which have a little
Why is that?
slant. Why is that?
Yeah.
Well, they were never really keen, even when football was being played, there were teams in the Houthi region, because they really weren't, they were more interested in religion
Yeah.
than football, so they didn't go there. And then, of course, later they complained that the government didn't do anything for them, which, anyway. So they didn't do it. They did have summer camps, training for indoctrination for kids. They did play soccer there. Lately, I think in the last year or so, there's been reports that the Houthis are now suddenly interested in football. Because when the teams have Yemeni, the international teams have been winning, the Houthis have been trying to claim credit for this, even though, of course, they did nothing. But, I mean, that's politics, and it should be no surprise to you in that sense, because that's how it goes. Okay, there's coffee.
There's coffee to
Thank
keep
you.
us warm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks to
Thank
our
you for coming.
co-sponsors, School of Global Studies and Nina's too.
Oh, global studies.